Assalamu alaikum and peace upon you and shalom. Thanks for coming, all of you, tonight. And I'd just like to introduce our next speaker, and Mr. Daniel Boyce. Mr. Boyce is a civil and criminal trial attorney. He was working as a federal prosecutor, assistant U.S. attorney for Eastern District of North Carolina, and was the Republican candidate for North Carolina State Attorney General in 2000. Please join me and welcome Mr. Daniel Boyce.
Thank you, Dr. El-Gamal. Good evening to everyone, and I want to thank your organization, the Muslim American Public Affairs Council, for inviting me here. I must, before I begin, say that before, about 3 years ago, I doubt I knew many people in this room. I knew very little about the religion of Islam. I knew very few Muslim friends, but in the summer of 2009, all that changed. Now I count many of you as not only acquaintances, but also friends. But unfortunately, those relationships developed because of what I still believe is an unfortunate prosecution of a fine young man that I represented beginning in the year 2009. I'd like to begin to show the crowd how this all started for me. I'm going to tell you the story about the prosecution of a case. And that case involved a man by the name of Daniel Boyce. And in addition to Daniel Boyce, there were a number of other individuals that were prosecuted along with him. So back in the summer of 2009, I was sitting at home watching WRAL TV Channel 5 when I saw a video that was played. The internet connection is blocking it, so you will not see the video. The video had the arrest of seven individuals, and that began the prosecution of the United States versus Daniel Boyce. As a result of that prosecution, we began a journey with Omar Hassan and his family and started what turned out to be a 2-year journey through the court system on a case that received national recognition. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that, and I'm going to share with you some of the information that came through at trial. And it all started back in 2009, and the case was known as U.S. v. Boyce, and it involved conflict and issues related to war, politics, and religion, and that conflict was with our individual rights under the United States Constitution. I want to use this opportunity to talk to you about the uniqueness of the United States and explain to you why I still believe firmly we do have the best judicial system in the world, but show to you some things that were difficult to accept in this particular case. First of all, I pointed out that the Boyce case did involve these conflicts of war, politics, and religion versus individual rights. Now, when you consider foreign countries versus the United States, we see worldwide that there are dictatorships, there's communism in other countries with forms of rule other than democracy and a representative republic. The United States, however, was founded on principles found in the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. Our forefathers in the Declaration of Independence stated as follows: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The founders of our country also formed the United States Constitution, which guaranteed certain freedoms, such as the First Amendment, which protects our freedom of speech, religion, and association, and the Second Amendment right to bear arms. Now, what must be remembered is that all men and women, whether they be white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Middle Eastern, Christian, Jew, Hindu, or Muslim, All people have those protected rights. But all that changed, unfortunately, after the difficulties of 9/11. When we think back to that horrific day in September of 2011, over 10 years ago, and think how it changed not only the way we go to an airport, but each and every one of our lives, it truly was a horrific event. But unfortunately, as a result, there have been some types of investigations that have not been in the best interest of personal freedoms. One such case that occurred locally, one investigation, was the U.S. v. Boyd case. This case, the discovery of the case, took 2 years to sort out and organize. It consisted of 42,000 pages of documents, 750 hours of audio and video, 22 computer hard drives. That's a lot of information for an attorney. And during this investigation in preparation for trial, the attorneys, my colleagues who actually went to trial, we had to learn the Muslim faith and figure out a way to transfer that education that we received to the jury. One of the most difficult things we faced was the objective at trial of fears, prejudice, and some preconceived notions in favor of law enforcement and against our client. We knew at the beginning that we were facing somewhat of an uphill battle because of certain of those prejudices and beliefs and fears. I'd like to give you a roadmap on what the evidence was at trial and what we argued in closing argument. First of all, I'll talk to you about Omar Hassan's background. I'll talk to you about Daniel Boyce's background and the contrast of that background. I'll talk to you about a 2007 overseas trip to Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Egypt. I'll mention something about the 2007 through 2009 evidence, the charges that the government brought, and the evidence against Omar Hassan. The reason why I think it's so important to share this with you is because the purpose of this speech tonight is to talk to you about your rights and responsibilities under the law. But to fully understand that, I believe it's important for you to hear about the evidence against my client Omar Hassan, who was found not guilty of being a terrorist, but found guilty of providing material support to terrorism. And when you hear this story, my hope is each and every one of you will go home and discuss with your loved ones, with your children, and with your friends the dangers of social media, the dangers involved in emails, even the dangers of the pictures that you might have on your cell phone. First of all, a little bit about my client, and I consider him a friend, Omar Hassan. Omar was a U.S. citizen. He was an NC resident, North Carolina resident since middle school. He went to the local Cary High School public school and was at NC State University. Omar had many jobs. He worked at UPS. He was a soccer referee. Omar was an average teenager. He was active in sports. He attended school. He attended the local IAR, and he was a very family-oriented person. Omar was about 18 or 19 years old when this part of the journey began, and at that time he was listening, asking questions about his Islamic faith. He talked to others about his Muslim obligations, like other teenagers and young men, and Omar was trying to find his own personal moral compass. Omar struggled with being a westernized United States teenager and the conservative principles of the Muslim faith. You contrast that with Daniel Boyce. Daniel Boyce at trial was described as every parent's worst nightmare. He admitted when he testified he was sick. He was preying on teenagers and young men to feed this sickness and to build his own persona that he had created and called Saifullah. In the beginning of this story in 2007, he was talking in a rambling fashion about the duties of being a good Muslim. But over time, From 2007 forward, he became more and more extreme in his discussions about what his beliefs were about the Islamic faith. Now, the evidence at trial that came into evidence that the jury heard had basically 10 pieces of evidence that were directly attributable to my client, Omar Hassan. First, the trip to Israel in 2007. Second, a video of Omar Hassan doing nothing more than shooting a gun across a lake. Third, pictures of war and pictures of guns on his Facebook page. Fourth, a slogan and a flag that had some innocuous, but the government viewed it as sinister support of supporting troops, meaning terrorist troops. 5 Facebook postings in what the kids called Muslim gangster rap, which quite frankly were profane, they were offensive, and they were anti-Semitic. Also, he had some correspondence in which he talked about a man by the name of Anwar al-Awlaki. They also had pictures of Omar Hassan playing paintball. And they had a recorded call in which he asked someone to take down his Facebook. And finally, they had him making the statement while he was in custody, "I don't care if they give me 10 years or life, Jinnah is worth it." Our argument to the jury, ladies and gentlemen, was those were some things that may have been inappropriate, but it did not constitute evidence of Omar Hassan joining Daniel Boyce's conspiracy to commit terrorist acts. The indictment only listed the 2007 trip overseas, and they did have Daniel Boyd, his 2 sons, and 3 informants testify at the trial. Daniel Boyd testified that he did help Omar Hassan buy a ticket and travel for Omar's travel overseas. Omar, however, paid for his ticket, and he paid for a round-trip ticket. He traveled separately from the Boyds, and when he was interviewed by law enforcement in the airports, he acknowledged that he might see the Boyds overseas. Daniel Boyd had even told Omar to tell his parents he would be meeting Boyd in Tel Aviv. The evidence also showed, ladies and gentlemen, that Daniel, Zach, and Dylan Boyd acknowledged that they did not communicate with Omar for approximately a year after that trip in the summer of 2007. They testified there was no connection between Omar and the other co-defendants. The 3 informants said they didn't know Omar Hassan and had no correspondence with Omar Hassan. They testified that there was no other witness that they knew of that could show that Omar Hassan entered into a conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists. Of all the audio tapes that were introduced at trial and all the audio tapes in discovery, there was not a single hour of recording, not even a minute, not even a second, suggesting that Omar Hassan had become part of the conspiracy. The indictment alleged that Omar Hassan was involved in providing material support in the form of providing currency or training or transportation or personnel. And yet the evidence at trial suggested only this summer of 2007 trip. The FBI agent who testified acknowledged that there was no audio or video of Omar meeting with any of the informants, any of the co-defendants, or any of the co-conspirators. They acknowledged that Omar's purchase of a gun was a pea shooter and not the type of gun that one would carry into battle. And they agreed that Omar was polite and cooperative in the 2 interviews after the summer of 2007. The agent even testified that Omar told him in an interview that killing other Muslims and innocents is against Islam. The informants who testified, one of which had been involved in the Daniel Boyd organization from 2005 to 2009, testified he didn't even know Omar. The other informant, who was paid $110,000 for assisting the FBI in its investigation from 2005 5 and owned, never met or spoke with Omar Hassan. Another informant who was paid approximately $93,000 for assistance to the FBI from May 2000 through the January of 2010 said he also never met Omar Hassan. The government also introduced a number of young men who talked about their relationship with Omar. One young man named Jamar said Omar had introduced him to Islam with very general information, including books, DVDs, translations of the Quran, and he too said he was trying to find his own personal moral compass. Jamar also acknowledged he had listened to al-Awaqi's speech, and he stated that al-Awaqi was English. He spoke and was very articulate in his English. Jamar knew of the al-Awaqi literature and that it was once at one time mainstream, and he acknowledged that later on that al-Awaqi had gotten extreme in his views. But he said he had never heard Omar say he was conspiring with Daniel Boyce to provide material support to terrorists. Another young man by the name of Hamza said much the same thing, and he talked about their playing paintball for fun. He talked about Omar training to be in good physical shape, but it was not in an effort to prepare himself to commit violent jihad. And he acknowledged that the Facebook was general in its conversation, and the sharing of information they had was because of an interest in different types of issues involving world culture, war, and religion. He admitted to having a posting similar to Omar that said simply, "Support our troops," and he testified he was not promoting violent jihad, but rather he thought the picture was cool. All these witnesses, one after one, came to testify, not on behalf of Omar, but on behalf of the government. And each and every single one testified that Omar was not involved in a conspiracy. We also heard from the Daniel Boyce family. We heard from Daniel Boyce's son, Zach. He also testified that Omar never conspired with anyone in his family to commit violent jihad. He testified that the Boyce family plan for the summer of 2007 overseas trip was to go see the holy sites. And he testified there was no planning or preparation prior to that trip to commit violent jihad. He talked about his shooting as an Eagle Scout as being for fun, and he won a merit badge. And he said he never trained or practiced shooting with Omar Hassan for the purpose of committing violent jihad. Zach Boyd was asked specific questions, and he testified he never discussed any of the allegations in the indictment that supported Omar Hassan supporting violent jihad. He testified he never discussed with Omar transferring money, traveling someplace to commit jihad, getting married as a code phrase for getting involved in jihad, going to the beach as a code phrase for becoming involved in jihad, gathering or providing material support, currency, or training. Zach's brother Dylan also testified, and he too talked about Omar and his relationship with Omar. And it was a very short relationship. It was a relationship in which he acknowledged they had conversations about Islam. He said Omar was trying to understand the truth and that he seemed confused about the community discussion about the obligations of being a good Muslim. He said Omar was listening and appearing unsure and only asking general questions, nothing specific. And he too acknowledged that al-Awaqi had at one point been mainstream and easily available in downloads on the internet. All that being said, probably the highlight of the trial was when Daniel Boyce himself testified. Daniel Boyce had pled guilty, and he talked about his role in trying to bring in young teenage men, young Muslims, into the fold and make them believe his crazy beliefs. I don't know what else you call it but crazy beliefs. And he acknowledged that he had taken a downward spiral and was sick. He testified he shared tea, he shared quotes from contemporary scholars, and he discussed jihad and Muslim obligations with Omar. But he said the 2000 trip was not in furtherance of violent jihad, and he said that he had no plans with Omar Hassan to do anything of the sort during that 2007 trip. He said the trip was to learn more about the holy sites, and again, it had nothing to do with violent jihad. And he said when he did discuss verses and traditions of the Muslim faith with Omar, it was in a benign fashion. Daniel Boyce described Omar as a goofy kid and not dangerous. And he testified that his discussions with Omar were quite different from his discussions with others. And he acknowledged on cross-examination he had no agreement with Omar to provide material support to terrorists. He had no agreement with Omar to kidnap, murder, maim, or otherwise injure another person. Now, there was evidence also introduced at trial about Facebook. I assume everybody in the room now knows what Facebook is. And I will tell you this, after having gone through this trial with Omar Hassan, Facebook can be a good thing, but it can be a very, very bad thing. Now, Omar had Facebook pictures, and he had Muslim gangster rap, and he had silly things, and that's how he described it, things where he didn't mean a thing by it, but he thought it was just funny. But the federal government took that information and tried to portray Omar Hassan in a way that I disagree with. With all due respect to my former colleagues and friends at the U.S. Attorney's Office, to this date, I do not think that my client Omar Hassan ever had any intention of committing violent jihad either overseas or in the United States. But the Facebook that was used against him, the government tried to portray a different type of picture. They also attacked Omar for his having suggested to someone after he had been arrested to deactivate the Facebook. I suggested to the jury that that was the right thing to do, that any parent would have told their child to immediately get rid of the Facebook because of the problems it could cause one. And Omar did exactly the right thing in shutting it down. Now, there were also some other recordings of Omar after he was arrested, one of them being a statement he made, "I don't care if they give me 10 years or life, Jinnah is worth it." I suggested to the jury that that is no different than a Christian talking about being wrongly accused and knowing that a life of righteousness and accepting Jesus Christ as one's personal Savior is the pathway to heaven. I also suggested to the jury that isn't it possible that all these acts were a young, immature 19-year-old, that maybe he was working out simply because he wanted to stay physically fit, that maybe he shot a gun because he thought it was kind of cool or kind of fun, that maybe playing paintball was an activity that he and his buddies enjoyed, and that it was an exciting recreational activity, not in preparation for violent jihad, that maybe when he said he was getting married, he meant it, that maybe when he said he was going to the beach, that's actually what he did in Egypt, and that maybe he discussed current events, including war, including jihad, because of a true interest in world politics and because he, like other men like him at the age of 19, were looking for their own personal moral compass. I've got to stop there to tell you what I also told the jury. I told the jury we applaud the government for protecting us from foreign enemies and even our enemies right here in the United States. I told them that the government should be commended for their efforts to stop evil people such as Daniel Boyce, Anas Sabasic, or Jude Muhammad, and others who actively engage in terrorism. I told the jury we need laws. We need law enforcement to enforce those laws, and we need prosecutors to seek justice. One thing that I was not allowed to tell the jury that I will tell you is exactly what you saw in the video earlier. In 1942, during World War II, the United States, through an executive order issued by President Roosevelt, imprisoned Japanese Americans who were U.S. citizens in detention or internment camps, and they were referred to as war relocation camps. Because of American fear, these individuals may cause acts or commit acts of treason against the United States, the thinking was. And it was not until 1988 that Congress and President Reagan apologized for the United States' actions by noting race, prejudice, war, hysteria, and a failure of political leadership may have been involved. There's an old military term that I used in my closing argument in front of the jury, and it's called friendly fire or collateral damage. That's when in war you have innocent people or unintended victims that get caught in friendly fire. The government thought my friend Omar Hassan had signed up for Daniel Boyce's platoon of terrorists. But in reality, to this day, I firmly believe that Omar Hassan is the victim of friendly fire. The only thing Omar Hassan is guilty of is stupidity, 19-year-old stupidity of putting stupid things on a Facebook, by putting stupid things on his cell phone and saying some stupid things. Omar Hassan was found guilty, I think, because of a fear and because of guilt by association. So where does that lead us? What do we talk about moving forward? And what did we learn from trial? First of all, in today's society, the Muslim community faces choices. Public debate, which is First Amendment protected speech, versus being put in a conspiracy. A citizen's right to bear arms, protected by the Second Amendment, versus being put in part of a conspiracy. Freedom of association, another guarantee protected by the First Amendment, versus being placed into a conspiracy. And freedom of religion, a First Amendment protected right versus being put in a conspiracy. That's some serious stuff. I think young people think that they can say and do anything they want. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. So as a father, as a parent, I thought, what can I share with these folks about this experience, and what recommendations can I make to all of you for all your young teenagers, for all the young men and women in your community, to make sure they don't become a victim like I believe Omar Hassan has become a victim of. First of all, beware of extremists who hijack an otherwise peaceful religion. Secondly, beware of what you say on Facebook and other social media sites. Third, beware of what pictures you take. Fourth, beware of what you keep on your phone. Fifth, beware of what you say over the telephone, even if you are joking. Next, beware of what you put in emails, even if you are joking. And the bottom line, and finally, choose your friends carefully and beware of radical groups when they start agreeing to take action. If you can tell your children they can talk about it, but if it goes beyond a philosophical conversation, beware. You will be a good parent to your children. It is my hope that Omar Hassan's case, as it winds its way through the judicial system, will be reversed. His case is on appeal to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we hope and we pray that one day justice will be served and Omar will be found not guilty. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I will be more than happy to answer any questions, or if you'd like to stop by and share any thoughts you might have. I'll be happy to answer questions privately also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are a few questions now. There are a few questions now that we've collected. If you guys have any written down on the cards, please pass them forward. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more questions than we have time to address. But like Mr. Boyce said, you can catch him during dinner and ask them. So this question, do you believe a Muslim can get a fair trial in this very charged atmosphere, talking about the most recent, the often bigoted presidential debates? So do you feel Muslims can get a fair trial?
I think it's an uphill battle. I really do. I think there are certain prejudices that everybody in this room knows exist. And I think it's important for you to be doing what you're doing because, unfortunately, in the United States, this isn't the first time that our great nation has shown some prejudice and some racism. So I think what you're doing here to attempt to bridge the gap in communication with people. I'm a Baptist, and I'm here. I was taught in my religion that I have my personal beliefs, but you have your personal beliefs. And that's one of the fundamental bases that this country is based on, and that is the freedom of religion. For me to serve my God, and for you not to accuse me of a crime because of that, and vice versa. Do I think you can get a fair trial? I will point out this. Omar was found not guilty of being a terrorist. What he was found guilty of was providing material support, I assume, for that summer of 2007 trip with the boys. But I am hopeful, again, that the American justice system ultimately will do the right thing for Omar.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. There were a lot more questions that we couldn't get to, but if you can catch Mr. Boyce during dinner, I'm sure he'll be happy to address them. Thank you very much. Thank you.